Hello, everyone. My name is Timea Crofony, and I would like to welcome you to another episode of our EAIS talks on Israel studies. It's my great pleasure and also an honor to have Professor Colin Shindler here with us today, who is an honorary president of the European Association of Israel Studies. Please welcome.
Thank you. Thank you very much. In my long life, I've never been anything that is honorary or anything that is president. So,
thank you. Well, Professor Shindler is emeritus professor at the School of Oriental and African Studies at University of London. He became the first professor of Israel studies in the UK and was the founding chairman of our European Association of Israeli Studies in 2009. He is the author of 12 books, including The History of Modern Israel, published by the Cambridge University Press. And he is also the author of almost 800 articles and reviews. His main interests lie in the evolution of the Israeli right, the changes in the approach of the British and European left towards Israel, and immigration movement of Soviet Jews between 1917 and 1999. Today, we will talk about Professor Shindler's latest book and really an impressive piece of work, which is called Israel, A History in 100 Cartoons, which was published by Cambridge University Press in February 2023. For each year, there are 4 pages, a cartoon by an iconic Israeli cartoonist of the time, a timeline for the year, and 2 pages of what happened during that year. There are also sections on Zionism, the road to 1948, and long introduction about the role of Jews in satire, caricatures, and cartoons internationally. My first question is, how did you even come up with the idea to make a book about cartoons from the historical point of view?
Well, I think that I've always liked cartoons. I always think it's wonderful. And I think for anyone who challenges ideas, authority, establishment, however you want to put it, cartoons can say something in, just one instant picture, one instant caricature. You can see all the books around me, myself and others, they've written huge books, but a cartoon can say it in just one look, one glance. And that's what's amazing. And it must be 8 or 9 years ago, I discovered that there was a cartoon museum in Holon, Tel Aviv. Mm-hmm. I went there, absolutely wonderful. They have archives of cartoons, publications. It's mainly educational stuff. So they bring lots of kids and all the rest of it. They have a few exhibitions. It's relatively small, but it's absolutely wonderful. So that was the first thing. The thing I was, before we started this, I was looking my book on the Israeli right. So this must have come out, I think, in 2015, 2016, and already then I was interested in, you put photographs as illustrations, and I don't know if people can see that, but I put one in a Begin from 1955. He's sitting on a rocking horse, and the rocking horse is like this, and the rocking horse is labeled demagogia, the demagoguery. And so, already then I was interested. So I really started this properly, I suppose, with the onset of COVID. Mm-hmm. And that, in a strange way, gave me the space and the time to actually work on this.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. And so basically, cartoon can represent, let's say, condensed version of some event, right? You wrote also that the political cartoon gives voice to the powerless. So we already have these 2 reasons for why political cartoon and satire is so interesting for you. What is another special characteristics of political cartoons and satire, maybe in how it's perceived by the audience?
Well, I do think that because it's so instant, I mean, you can pick up any media, any newspaper, for example, where you are, where I am, where our audience is, and they will find a cartoon and they will start to smile, you know, because it hits at what is going on. So today in Britain, for example, there's a big controversy, big debate in Parliament. And I'm pretty sure all the newspapers, they will have wonderful cartoons attacking Rishi Sunak or someone else, and it will be something really, really wonderful to see. I think, you know, I went into this quite blind, actually, because I like cartoons. And then I began to realize what this was really all about. I think cartoonists and caricaturists have always been outsiders because they attack the powers that be. They always stand outside, and in fact, that they've suffered from this when you've had authoritarian or totalitarian regimes. For example, one of the things I remember coming across was that in the 1970s there was a military junta in Argentina, the Dirty War, and they found cartoonists and basically killed them. And there are other examples like this. And I think Jews, in a funny way, are the ultimate outsiders. And there was a great preponderance of Jews amongst cartoonists, amongst caricaturists, and of course amongst satirists. Mm-hmm. So it all fitted together. But I didn't know any of this. You know, there was an instinct to do this at the beginning, and that was it. But gradually, the theory of why you're doing this comes later.
Mm-hmm. And you also cover this in the introductory parts, right? Like these underdogs in subjectivities, let's say, and so on. It was very, very interesting to read. But I want to ask you another question about writing process, because you mentioned on your website that your newest book was undeniably the hardest one to write for you from all of your big books. Could you share with us why it was so difficult and what it makes different? What makes it different from the other ones?
Yeah, I think there are a couple of reasons, really. First of all, it was quite laborious to write. You're doing a cartoon, one page, a timeline of that year, the second page, pages 3 and 4, the narrative, what happened in that year. So you've got to go through every year, and you've got to, and that can take forever. Mm-hmm. But you pick out what is interesting. What do you think is interesting? You know, other people may not think it's interesting. What do you think are the most important? So it was this. So it wasn't just writing something, you know, and you, as you're writing, ideas come to you. You're categorizing something. So that in a sense was laborious. Second of all, COVID. You know, I wasn't really writing this regularly. You know, I was stop and start. And when COVID came, this is my little office at home here, I sat down where I'm sitting now every day working on it. And it took the best part of the 2 years of COVID. So for most people who were marooned at home, it was terrible. They couldn't go to work and they couldn't see their families. For me, it was more of the same. And I was doing exactly what I did before, and so that was the other thing. The third thing, which came out of being isolated, is that I couldn't go to Israel. I couldn't go to the Cartoon Museum to look at the archives. So I worked with the archivist there, and she was absolutely marvelous. She was wonderful. So I would suggest to her, look, I'd like to feature this episode in, I don't know, 1955. These are the possibilities. What can you send me? So she would send me a dozen cartoons, and I would pick one of them. But wonderfully well, and she was able. There's a lady called Hilla Zahavi, and she carried out everything that I wanted to do. So it was marvelous, absolutely wonderful. And the other thing which I felt really communicated to me is that I used a cartoonist. Obviously, it goes up to 2020. The more recent ones I used of more modern cartoonists, but the early ones, I was able to speak to their children, their grandchildren, and they were delighted that someone knew about them. And I was really pleased to do that. So I was in contact with all the families, and I hope I've been able to reclaim some of the brilliance of these artists from 50, 60, 70 years ago. And that also was a wonderful experience for me.
Yeah, that sounds amazing. But how did you actually choose which cartoons or authors to include? Was that some strict rule about these decisions?
Just the opposite. It was purely arbitrary. I mean, I've written a, you know, this is the book, right? I've written the book. All of our audience who are watching this now could have written parallel books. There could have been an infinity of books. I just picked out what I thought were wonderful cartoons, ones that obviously indicated an episode in that year. So, for example, 1956, the SOAS campaign, I found a cartoon about that. So in one sense, it was very much a personal choice. And coming out of that in a strange way is that, okay, Cambridge University Press have published this, and they've done a wonderful job for me. But it's, you know, it's not exactly, it's not a cartoon book. You know, you're going to a newsagent, a bookshop, and you buy it and you sit there and it's great. It's on the other, you know, it's an academic book, but it isn't an academic book. It's a hybrid. It's a hybrid from many things. So that for me, again, all of these things only began, you know, when people like yourself began to ask me questions about it. I thought, well, what am I doing? You know, and then you begin to put it into some sort of context, into some sort of structure, and that's what I did.
As you mentioned that it's partially academic, but at the same time it's not, and it's a hybrid. I know that you are using also the cartoons for teaching, if I'm correct. So if I am correct, how do students react to that, and how exactly you use them? And maybe do you think that the usage of such type of visual materials can somehow facilitate the way for deeper or more complex understanding?
Right. Well, I think the academic answer is yes and no.
Again, a hybrid.
A hybrid, yes. It's a Jewish answer as well. The point is, I'm not teaching anymore. I haven't done for several years, you know, but I still write, I still do things. But one of the reasons that I started this is that I thought this would be an excellent way of getting into understanding Israel studies. Everyone likes cartoons. They look at this, they think, oh, this is great. This is funny. What does it mean? And then you read. So I saw this as a taster, a way of initiating perhaps first year students into getting into Israel studies. And that for me was important, because it's another way of doing things. And I think also it will interest the serious reader as well. I mean, again, I thought, why are cartoons interesting to people? Why could this be a way of getting students into academic Israel studies? And it was actually after the book was published more recently this year, there's a friend of mine who does talks about the Pesach, the Passover Haggadah, which tells the story every Passover of the Exodus from Egypt. And he's interested in medieval art. So you see these Haggadot from medieval times, and you see, for example, illustrations in it. You know, sometimes they have a bird's head. Sometimes they're carrying a leek. What do all these signifiers mean? And then I began to understand that what he was doing with the Haggadah in trying, you know, what's the story behind the story, I was doing in the same way with modern cartoons. And that for me was a revelation. I didn't really understand that until after the book was published.
Mm-hmm.
So, you know, I'm not sort of although probably no one's published such a book before, but I'm not the first person to have thought of this idea. It's an idea that has taken place in other situations, other circumstances, such as medieval illustrations.
Mm-hmm.
It was the way in which the Jews could actually hit back at their oppressors by having these strange illustrations. And people say, well, what does that mean? And when they understood, they said, yeah, that's good, you know.
Amazing. I really enjoyed how you said it was a revelation for you. So it's continue, like, from the reactions and from also talking about about your book with colleagues. Probably it's still a process somehow of the understanding of an impact of it, right? Can I ask you if during your work in the archives and with the cooperation with your colleague in the Cartoon Museum, did you find something that really surprised you, or maybe even partially changed your perspective you had on a given event or its reflection in the history?
I don't think it absolute. You know, there's a difference between change and evolve, right? Some people in life change from being young to being old. Other people evolve. They become more sophisticated. So I found cartoons, which I think, you know, you look at it on the surface of it, this is the explanation. But you look more closely and you begin to understand, oh, in the left-hand corner, there's that. Well, I know what that stands for. And, you know, I found a cartoon from 1937 of Jabotinsky as Gulliver amongst the Lilliputians, big giant, and all the people around him. And I began to understand these were all his opponents, like the Bundists, the communists, the critics in Poland. Very, very interesting. So, no, I think it didn't change my approach, but I certainly began to learn more. I began to understand how cartoons and caricatures are really sophisticated. You know, they're not, the first time you see them, you get an instant impression, but then you begin to think about it more and more.
Definitely. And now I have a bit, let's say, contemporary question about the current issues. In the light of events in Israel and Palestine, which basically started with the Hamas attack on 7th of October, did you find some cartoons covering the current situation somehow, or is it something you look for? And if yes, are these somehow different from the ones you worked with for your book?
I think that one of the cartoonists that I admire is Amos Biederman of Haaretz. And, you know, I mean, the problem is that the book stops at 2020, but there was one after it that I liked with when the demonstrations first started with the so-called judicial reform. There's a Biederman cartoon of Ben Gvir with driving with Netanyahu sitting next to him. And they're driving past the demonstration, and the balloon coming out of Ben Gvir's mouth says, "Bibi, shall I turn around and run them over? You know, this is, you know, shall I drive the car into them?" I mean, you think about it, it's unbelievable, but you can't help smiling.
Mm-hmm.
Now, regarding the 7th of October, there was a Biederman cartoon which again communicated to me, because it was about London, and you see the whole thing is a mass of people protesting for Palestine, saying from the river to the sea, and they're in Parliament Square, the mother of parliaments. They've even got the statue of Churchill, with Churchill holding a Palestinian flag. And okay, it's their right to demonstrate. And Biederman turned it into these masses from the river, meaning the River Thames, to the sea, meaning the English Channel. And, you know, once you start looking at it and you start thinking, it's amazing. And, you know, here in England, there have been hundreds of thousands of people who have been marching for Palestine every Saturday. And it's more a question of young Muslims expressing their Muslim identity. I mean, for example, they don't protest outside the Chinese embassy for the fate of the Muslim Uyghurs, but Palestine is this symbol, and it expresses their Muslim identity. No doubt about it. And therefore, what does from the river to the sea mean? They're shouting it. For me, it means a greater Palestine, which is the mirror image of a greater Israel of the settlers. You know, for Jews who wonder, are Jews going to be allowed to stay in this greater Palestine? So this is the problem. But, you know, for me, it was the Biederman cartoon was really, really something. And of course, it sets off all these trains of thought.
Yeah.
I'm trying to express to you now. So there you go.
Of course, of course. So we could see now in real time how one image, condensed one, can start the whole cycle of thoughts, and maybe another topic for a research of yours. When we speak about the current situation, and I know that you said that you are not teaching anymore, but from your long year teaching experience, can you share with us what are the main pitfalls of teaching about the realities and history of the region of Israel and Palestine, and how maybe how to teach actually during the times of crisis and war and challenging periods like the current one, because it's something else to teach about what already happened and teaching about the realities which are happening just now.
Of course, I sometimes think that teaching history is safer. You know, it's the past, it's gone. I taught for 10, 12 years at SOAS, where, well, let's put it this way, Israel is not the flavor of the month. I became the first professor of Israel studies in the UK. I can honestly say that I never had any instances of anti-Semitism directed at me during all that time. And I tried to strive for objectivity. So, you know, obviously I have personal views, which I express in my journalism, but I never tried to do this in the classroom. You have to separate your desire to be objective from your own personal views. It's never easy, but some people will go into classrooms and they just teach what they think. I think that's wrong. So I think there has to be that separation. When I gave the first lecture in my classes, I would start off by saying, you know, what happened in 1948? were the Palestinians expelled, or they leave with their own free will? And I would say some of them were indeed expelled. Many of them just left. And I would then say, look, these are the people that write on the Middle East, of Ilan Pappé, Benny Morris, Rashid Khalidi, others. And I said, you know, my approach is that of Benny Morris, because I think he's the most objective. That doesn't mean that you have to share my view, but you should educate yourself by reading all these people, coming to your own conclusion. Mm-hmm. So that's how I would start off. And you know, you have to be fair, you have to be straight, you have to be honest with students. I never had any problems. Mm-hmm. But interestingly, the problems that I did have, if that's what you call, for example, when Operation Cast Lead took place, 2008, 2009, I'd arranged with Tel Aviv University that a lecturer would come over every week. One would speak about, I don't know, Israeli theater. One would speak about, I don't know, building of towns. You know, nothing terribly contentious. But it coincided with Operation Cast Lead. So the first one happened to be one of the leading Israeli historians. And there was demonstrations outside the classroom. You know, you become, because you're visible, you can become the object. And so, you know, by using all my political acumen, if I can put it like that, I got the thing started, but this is with Anita Shapira. We got the thing started, but 15, 20 minutes late. Mm-hmm. But that was the sort of thing that I had to contend with. So, you know, if you're teaching Israel studies, and of course it depends on which country you're teaching it, depends which institution you're teaching it. Where I was much more of a target. Mm-hmm. Okay? You're the symbol. Mm-hmm. You're the symbol, okay? Yeah. And you just have to accept it and be, mm-hmm. and not be shocked, and be prepared. Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm. Thank you so much for sharing your insights. I think that's the question which has big urgency right now. Sometimes that people and scholars are sometimes, as you said, becoming an object, a target, just because of the area, let's say, you cover. And yeah, do you think that you can share with us also what are you currently working on?
What am I working on? The cartoon book came out a few months ago. I think there's going to be a paperback version, which probably is more affordable for people. That will come out at some point. I'm interested in doing something on the rise and fall of the Israeli left, mm-hmm. which I've written about anyway. But people like Avi Shilon has done something using Yossi Beilin's archives, but it's a very different book. It's not an overarching history. Mm-hmm. So I'm hoping that I'll get a contract for the book, and I've written the first chapter, which is basically about the French Revolution. Mm-hmm. And I discovered, for example, at the first Zionist Congress, that Max Nordau spoke about the great men of 1792. And I thought, that's very interesting. And you know, no one has looked at that. So, you know, and why 1792 and not 1789, which was the storming of the Bastille? So I explore all these things, and I found it very, very interesting. So I'm hoping that I will proceed and develop this, and I'm hoping that I'll get a publication contract as well at some point. So there you go. So
fingers crossed for you and also for us as the readers.
Well, that's very very nicely to
book
say.
will be will happen.
I'm growing old disgracefully, you see, and I can't put on my, you know, they say in England, you retire and you put your slippers on and you've got your pipe and sit back and enjoy things. And I find that very difficult personally. So, you know, you follow your own interests. I mean, I did a, where is it here? There's this book that I think you mentioned it about. It's about the far left, and that interests me tremendously. For example, I've actually written a piece. I've written an academic article for Israel Studies. You know, why the far left found it very difficult to condemn what happened on the 7th of October. And I discovered in 1881, the Russian pogroms, that the Narodnaya Volya, which was the main Russian progressive movement, also refused to condemn it. They didn't want to antagonize the pogromists, the peasants, and they thought that they could turn them towards opposing Tsarism. You know, it's what someone called it revolutionary anti-Semitism, which I think is an amazing phrase. So what I'm saying is, what has happened on the 7th of October and the reaction of the far left to it, and particularly women's organizations, you know, the rapes and all this sort of thing, the absence, the silence, this has happened before. This has happened before. It's not 2023, it's 1881 repeated, and there are many other instances of this. So for me, that's it's an important thing. So I've looked into that and I've written about that. But it all fits into this book that hopefully will come about the Israeli left. So we'll see.
We'll see, and hopefully we will see. Okay, so Professor Shindler, from my side, I think that we covered most of the topics I wanted to cover. But if there is something you want to share, and I did not ask you that question, now is the moment.
Nothing. I think, you know, once you start talking, you start talking. So all the points I think I wanted to mention, and you know, we live in difficult times, and you know, my hope that I mean, there was an Arab diplomat wrote to me, who was absolutely horrified after what had happened on the 7th of October. This is before the bombing in Gaza, but what had happened, and it was an amazing email. So, you know, out of all this chaos, this killings, I'm hoping that something will happen which brings Israelis and Palestinians together. You know, rationally, if you think about it, you think, well, this is not going to happen. But I suppose emotionally, and you know, it strikes in my core belief that I hope there is something that will take place. And you know, in a sense, this is connected to the passion which we all share for writing and lecturing about the Israel-Palestine conflict. You know, I said you try and divorce the objectivity. You strive for objectivity. On the other hand, you have personal views, but there's inevitably an overlap. And I think this happens with everybody. Everybody. So, you know, I'm hoping personally the hostilities end quickly, and let's see what comes out of it.
I think that this is a beautiful way how to finish our interview with hope and let's say kindness among the darkness. So thank you very much, Professor Shindler. It was great pleasure to speak with you, and thank you for your inspirational work.
My pleasure. Lovely to speak to you as well. Thank you.
Thank you. And thank you also to our audience, and see you during the next episode. Thank you and goodbye.